are souls to rescue. There are souls to save. Send the light. Send the light. Send the light. The blessed gospel light. Let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light. The blessed gospel light. Let it shine forevermore. Hello, everyone. We want to welcome you back to the online Open Bible Study course. Hope you've had a good day thus far and you're ready to tune in to the lesson for today. We're grateful that we managed to get through lesson number one. Hope you've been enjoying the study in OBS lesson number one. Today we are going to get into lesson number two. And as always, I mentioned that whenever you're in a Bible study, you want to make sure that you go back and review. Go back and review. And in lesson number one, finished with question number 19 and number 20. And this session was basically dealing with making a confession with your mouth. And so basically, when you go into the lesson with your student, go back and review. For example, in question number 19 in lesson number one, found out that in addition to believing, loving, and repenting, it is God's will that one should what? Confess, which means to acknowledge Christ before men. And then we also found out in question number 20, you will not be saved if you do not make a confession with your mouth. So we're talking about making confession with your mouth and acknowledging who Jesus Christ is. And so this is how we ended lesson number two. Now, back in module number 11, I did a review, and I went all the way back to the ladder, and we put a lot of emphasis on the fact that we were talking about establishing a strong foundation. And through establishing that foundation, talked about we're building scaffolding and we're moving towards the plan of salvation that has been put in place for mankind to be saved. And so we ended up on the wrong number 4, which was confession. Now, interestingly enough, we're going to move into module number 12, which is in lesson number 2. This is module number 12, lesson number 2. And we're going to begin with the topic of Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi. That's what we're going to be dealing with. Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi. And that's going to be in question number 1. Now, you notice lesson number 2 is blue. And the scriptural text that's given in question number 1 is Matthew chapter 16, verses 15 through 17. And now remember I said before, that's the scriptural text, but what we're going to do, we're going to go back to Matthew 16, and we're going to begin in verse 13 because there's some prerequisite information that's very important that you ensure that the student understands when you're studying with them. because we're still talking about confession. And what I said earlier was that we ended in lesson one on confession, but now we're moving into lesson two at the very beginning, and we're still talking about confession. So that lets you know that confession is pivotal, it is extremely important. And so, this scriptural text, Matthew 16, beginning in verse 13, is going to help us to really get what I consider to be a stronger, the foundation is strong, but now we're getting ready to really focus in on much deeper uh, confession or acknowledgement of who Jesus Christ is. And so we're going to begin looking at verse number 13. And let's just take a look at verse number 13. And so it says, when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? So when we look at this question or this text, Jesus is asking the disciples, whom do men say that I am? So let me give you just a little bit of information about Caesarea Philippi. So Caesarea Philippi was in an area just north of Galilee, about 25 miles northeast of the Sea of Galilee. That's the location. It was at the foot of Mount Hermon. It was one of the most important sources of the Jordan River, named after Herod Philip. Notice what it just said. It was named after Herod Philip. Now, interesting enough, Philip's name was added to Caesarea to distinguish. It was from the other Caesarea because it lets us know there are two locations here, which was located on the Mediterranean Sea, about 75 miles northeast of Jerusalem. So Caesarea Philippi was the most northern point mentioned in the travels of Jesus. Caesarea Philippi was the most northern point mentioned in the travels of Jesus. So that's how it got its name, Caesarea Philippi. So that's a little bit of background information about Caesarea Philippi. Now, it is also about 3 months before the death of Jesus Christ. So that helps us to see that this information that we're going to discuss is extremely important. And it's so important that when you get to this point in the lesson, you need to be prepared to talk about this. And remember, I said previously, when you're talking about this information, to not be in a rush to share the information. Take your time because this is the teaching of the doctrine that's very important. So Jesus had been training the apostles for 3 years. Notice what I just said. He has been training the apostles for 3 years, but now it's about 3 months before the death of Jesus. So what does that let you know? That something is extremely important that is getting ready to take place. So now Jesus wants to know if these apostles, who he had been teaching for 3 years, know for sure who he is. I think that's a good question. And so he asked them that question. But therefore, Jesus asked them also, he says, who do men say that the Son of Man is? So now he's talking about who do men say that the Son of Man is? And watch what happens. Verse 14. And they said, some say that thou art John the Baptist. So now you have some that are out there saying that you are John the Baptist. Some said you are Elias. Some said you are Jeremiah. And then some said that you are one of the prophets. And so, but Jesus indeed was a prophet. He indeed was a prophet. But however, he was much more than just a prophet. Jesus is the Christ. He is the what? The Son of God. That's who he is. He is the Christ, the Son of the living God. And so, but Jesus then comes back and he says in verse number 15, he said unto them, but whom say ye that I am? Now he's talking to those apostles. Now that you've told me what they're saying out there in the coast of Caesarea Philippi, I want to know, do you know who I am? And watch what happens in verse number 16. And Simon Peter answered and said, notice, Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. So here we have words that are being spoken by who? Simon Peter. That is a confession. That's why this topic is Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi. And so Simon Peter answered and said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, just to give you just a little bit more information about verse number 16. Now, Peter is known by 4 names in the gospel. Before he met Christ, he was called Simon, which is diminutive from Samuel. Jesus named him Cephas, which is Aramaic. Peter is also the Greek form of Cephas. Peter and Cephas means rock. Notice what I just said. Peter and Cephas means rock. So it's a double name. Simon Peter is used only here in Matthew and in Luke 5:8. And so what does it help you to see? That we're talking about Simon Peter. And so when Peter speaks, he is speaking for all the apostles. One might think that when Peter made that statement, it was just all about Peter. That's not true. Peter is speaking for all of the apostles. He acknowledges 2 things. First, he acknowledges that Jesus of Nazareth is the Christ. Christ is the Greek word, or the Greek of the Hebrew, Messiah. That's who Christ is, the Messiah. It means the anointed one. Jesus is the human Messiah for whom the Jews had been looking. Now, that lets us know that the Jews have been searching for Jesus Christ. And then 2 Peter acknowledges that Jesus is divine. Jesus is divine. So Peter confesses Jesus is the Son of the living God. And so we understand here that when that confession is made, Peter is speaking on behalf of the apostles and not just Peter himself. Now look at verse number 17. And Jesus answered and said unto Peter, unto him, he said, Blessed art thou, Simon Barjona, for flesh and blood had not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven. So let's take a closer look at that. So Jesus pronounces a blessing upon Peter and the apostles. One might think, well, it's just all about Peter. And that's why I keep bringing this back to the forefront. It's just not all about Peter. Even though he's speaking to Peter, it's about Peter and the apostle. The word bar, B-A-R, means the son of. Therefore, Simon Bar-Jonah means Simon, son of Jonah. And then he goes on to say, flesh and blood means human beings or mankind did not derive or arrive at the conclusion that Jesus was the Son of God by the teachings of men. So in other words, flesh and blood did not reveal that unto you. That's what he's saying there. In other words, they arrived at this conclusion, and notice how they arrived at the conclusion. By observing the life of Jesus, listening to the teachings and the observing of his miracles, and therefore the apostles came to this conclusion by the evidence of God had given unto them. Now notice what I just said. This is evidence from who? It is evidence from God. And so why are you saying all this? Because when you're teaching your student, we're emphasizing something very, very important here. We're talking about a profound confession that's being made. This is profound. The fact is that when Peter had made the confession that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, that was not revealed to him through flesh and blood. Mankind, humans did not reveal that unto him. That was revealed to him by God the Father. So let's just be clear. That's through, how did it happen though? It happened through the apostles being what? Observant of Jesus, listening to Jesus, and being observant of the miracles that he performed in their presence. That's how that conclusion came to fruition. God revealed it unto him. And so you want to make sure that this is a springboard section. This is a springboard because it's getting ready to establish something that will take place in the future. And keep in mind, we mentioned just a moment ago that this is 3 months before Jesus will die on the cross. He had been with those disciples for how many years? He had been with them for 3 years. And so your student needs to know this background information. They need to know that Jesus is in the process of preparing to die. So that lets us know that something is going to take place in the very future. Now watch what happened in verse number 18. Now, so we know, I'm going to go back here just for a moment. Here's question number 1. Now, if you notice, in question number 1, it just gave us Matthew 16, verses 15 through 17. That is not enough information to help a person fully understand the context that's taking place here. That's why we went back to verse 13, because there was a lot of information in verse 13, 14, which connects to verses 15 through 17, which now is also going to connect into verse number 18. So that's why it's important to read the scriptures before and sometimes the scriptures that follow after. Now, watch what he says in verse number 18. He says, "And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter." There it is. "And I say also unto thee that thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it." So here's some more information about that. Jesus now states that Simon Bar-Jonah was who? He was Peter. And no doubt about that. Jesus now states that Simon Bar-Jonah was Peter. Now, when he says, "and upon this rock," refers to the foundation upon which the church will be built. So, in other words, the rock means it is an unmovable ledge of rock. The rock upon which Jesus will build the church was the truth of the statement that Peter made. Notice what I just said. The rock upon which Jesus will build the church was the truth. What is the truth? The truth is the statement that Peter made. What statement did Peter make? He said, "Thou art what? The Christ, the Son of the living God." I say again, the rock upon which Jesus will build the church was the truth. So, in other words, the confession that Peter made, that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, I am going to take that truth, I'm going to take that statement, and I'm going to build my church. That statement, that confession, that's why we took a look at back in lesson number 1, we reviewed that, because that's where we left off on confession. Now that we're in lesson number 2, we're at Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi is still dealing with confession. What am I saying? I am saying this confession right here is the most important confession that has been made thus far. This is the most important confession that has been made so far. So, in other words, the apostles, Peter makes the confession that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, and we know that is collective. It's not just Peter, it's all the apostles. That confession that Peter makes, Jesus said, "Peter, I'm going to build a church." And your students need to know, what are you talking about? I'm going to build a church. Well, the church that we're talking about at this point is in the future. And they need to understand that this church that he's talking about has not come yet, but it's in the future. And that's why you have to capture their mind. You have to capture the attention of the student so that they can be looking forward to the future. Because we're trying to make sure that we establish the fact that this church that Jesus is going to build is his church. It's not just a church that are possessed by other people. It is a church that will be built solely by Jesus Christ and not by mankind. And we want to make a distinction that when we do get to the point to where we are talking about Jesus' church, and we're not talking about man-made denominations or different churches that are out in the world today. We're talking about the church that will be established in the what? In the future. And so that's why this question is very important. Question number 1 is extremely important. And you want to make sure that you take some time to explain this. And so again, I will build my church, and upon this rock, what are we talking about? We're talking about the truth. What truth? We're talking about the statement, Peter, that Peter made and the others, that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's the truth. That's the confession. To sum that up in simple terms, thank you, Peter, and all the apostles, because that confession that you made, you all made that confession. Ain't no doubt about it. And I'm going to do something with that confession. I'm going to build my church. And you know what else? Every person that will become a part of my church, the church that I'm building, they too will have to make a confession that I am the Christ and that I am the Son of God. In other words, once this church is established, every person that will be added into this church will have to make the same confession that you men made today. When I asked the question, whom do you say that the Son of Man is? Peter answered, said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, along with the others. This is a confession, the ultimate confession. It is huge. And every person, not just some, let's just be clear. Every person, not just some, will have to make this confession to come in to this church. And so that's the evidence and the significance of this question number one, which is module 12 that deals with Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi. This is extremely important. You probably say, well, why do you keep saying that over and over? I'm pressing this point because this understanding and making sure that when you're teaching someone about this question, that they understand this, because this will help them to make a big distinction of why there are so many churches on this earth today that have not been established by Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ established his church, his possessive church, the one church. And so that's the emphasis here. So now I've shared with you some information. I gave you some background information. I think it's important for you to go back and revisit it, take a look at it, and write some notes down. I had to make many notes here because this is the springboard. When I say it's a springboard, it's like diving off a springboard. This is going to launch. What is it going to launch? It is going to launch the beginning and the establishment of the church that Jesus said he's going to build. But not only that, he said, Peter, you are this rock, and I'm going to build my church upon this rock. What is the rock? It is the truth. It is the statement. It is the confession. This is how I'm going to build my church. You said something, and I'm going to use what you said as the foundation in building this church. And so that's the emphasis there. Now, when we look at question number one, let's look at it. Was Jesus pleased with Peter's acknowledgement? I would have to say, yes, he was. What was the acknowledgement? It was a confession. Fact is, even though Peter made that confession, let's be clear. The others are there with him. That is collective. It means that they all knew that. Next part. Will Christ be pleased if you make the same confession? Look at that. Now tell me that's not interesting. I think that's interesting because it says, will Christ be? I would only think that if I just sat down with a student and I did all of that teaching and sharing of that information, and then I'm asking them this question, will Christ be pleased if you made the same confession today? I would have to say, yes, he would be pleased with that confession. The other flip side of it is the fact that I guarantee it, that when we get to this question, most people have never made that confession, nor have they even heard of it, because they haven't read it, nor have they been taught that a confession must be made, nor have they been taught that I must make a confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. They have not been taught that. I can take a look at myself and say, no, I had not been taught that. So clearly, I'm going to say, yes, he will be pleased if I make that same confession today. Now, watch the next question. Can you be saved by desiring only? Now, notice what it's not a trick question, but it is setting them up to make sure that they understand that confession is important. Can you be saved by desiring only? I desire to be saved. No, I can't just be saved by just desiring only. Can you be saved by just believing only? No, I cannot be saved just by believing only. Can you be saved just by confessing Christ only? No, I cannot be saved by desiring only, believing only, or confessing Christ only. They should say no. And that's why all of this prerequisite information is so important in making sure that the person understands, yes, confession is important. It is the truth. Why it is the truth? Because Peter said it. That's why it's the truth, and it's in the scripture. Peter said it clearly. Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. That is a confession. That's the truth. That's a statement that Peter made. And he said, and upon this rock, I'm going to build my church. What is the rock? The truth, the statement, the confession. Now, in the what? Future. So that lets us know in the future, this church that he's going to build is not here yet, but it's coming. I like that. It's coming. And so we're going to conclude right here in question number one. So what are we talking about? We're talking about Peter's confession at where? Caesarea Philippi. And the other apostles talked about how Jesus asked them the question, who do men that say that I am? Some John the Baptist, some Elijah, some Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Jesus asked him the question, who do you say that the Son of Man is? Simon Peter answered, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. And as a result of that, a blessing is rendered. Now notice, a blessing is rendered to Peter and the others. Thought I might emphasize that. Yes, Peter is a spokesperson here, but the others are inclusive of that as well. And so that's question uh, number one in lesson number two. Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi. That's our lesson for today. That's module number 12. I hope the information that I shared today was helpful to you. It's certainly been helpful to me. And as always, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and I always say, uh, share this information, your family, friends, your circle of influence, because it is a seed that you can plant. Because we are in a study called the Online Open Bible Study that will help us all to be better and to be more effective in teaching and sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ through who? The apostles' doctrine. That's what we're doing. We're sharing the gospel through who? The apostles' doctrine. That's our mission. That's what we're here for. And so, as always, we'll have those questions that will follow. Uh, Take time to answer those questions. Take time to make comments. Take time to begin chats if that's what you choose to. Take time to send me a message. I'm always seeking to learn and to grow and to become more knowledgeable and become more wise as I study the Word of God. And so we're in this together. Alone, what can we do? Together, we have the power. And so, again, we thank you so much for tuning in today, and we'll see you in module number 13. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine from shore to shore. Send the light, the blessed gospel light, let it shine forevermore.